The Rolls-Royce did not belong in the room, and neither did the woman standing next to it. It sat in the third bay of the auto shop at Lincoln Vocational High School, a Rolls-Royce Phantom, midnight black, $500,000 of hand-built English engineering, parked between a 2004 Civic with no hood and a pickup that 3 teenagers were learning to break bleed on. Fluorescent lights, concrete floor, a radio playing somewhere. 16-year-olds in safety glasses, frozen mid-task, staring at the most expensive thing any of them had ever seen, and at the woman beside it, who was wearing a coat that cost more than the Civic and the Honda and the pickup combined. Patrice Hollis had not slept well in a year, and it showed under the makeup. She had come here at the end of a rope so long and so frayed that she had nearly not come at all, because everything about this place insulted the logic her entire life was built on. She had spent, on this car, over the last 14 months, more than $1 million. The Rolls-Royce dealership, 2 independent mark specialists, flown in, a diagnostics firm that charged by the hour and billed like it. The best, the most expensive, the top of every list, because Patrice Hollis had learned a long time ago that you get what you pay for, and the most you can pay buys the most you can get. And the car still did the thing. The maddening, intermittent, unfindable thing. And now she was standing in a high school auto shop because a tow truck driver had told her, almost embarrassed, that if she really wanted it found, there was a teacher out in the valley who found things nobody else could. "Let me be clear about where I am," Patrice said, to the man in coveralls who'd come out of the back, wiping his hands on a rag, looking at her car with an expression she couldn't read. "I have spent 14 months and over $1 million. I have had this car in front of the best specialists in the country. The actual best. And I am now standing in a high school because I've run out of options." Her voice cracked at the edges, exhausted, furious. "I spent $1 million, and nobody can fix this." The man in the coveralls 50s, calm, a teacher's patience worn into him like a groove, looked at the Rolls. Then at her. Then, for 1 second, at the 16-year-olds watching from the next bay. "Huh," he said. "What's it actually doing?" "The symptom, not the warning lights. What's it doing?" She told him. "The intermittent stalling, the brake pedal that sometimes went hard as stone, the dashboard lighting up like a carnival and then going dark, never the same way twice, never when anyone was looking." The man listened, really listened, head tilted, eyes somewhere past her, the way you listen to a sound and not a person. Then he nodded, once, like something had clicked into place. "Oh," Marcus Webb said. "Yeah, but I can fix that. With a $12 part." The room went so quiet you could hear the radio. Patrice Hollis stared at him. "I spent $1 million, I heard you," Marcus said gently. He reached over to his workbench and picked up a 2-foot length of clear plastic hose, the cheapest tool in the building. "And I'm not saying it to be cute. I think your $1 million has been looking in the wrong place for 14 months. He turned toward the Phantom and popped the hood, and the great engine of the most expensive car in the world lay open under the fluorescent lights of a public school auto shop. "Give me 10 minutes, and let my students watch. This is the best lesson I'll teach all year." Patrice Hollis knew the price of everything, and she had earned that knowledge the hard way. She had grown up in a trailer outside a town that doesn't appear on most maps, the daughter of a mother who cleaned houses and a father who left, and she had learned about money the way you only learn it when you don't have any, as a constant, grinding, humiliating absence. She had learned that money was the thing that decided whether the lights stayed on, whether you ate the good week or the bad week, whether the other kids looked at you with pity or didn't look at you at all. Money to a poor child is not an abstraction. It is the whole weather of your life, and Patrice had spent her childhood under its worst storms. So she had decided, somewhere around the age of 10, standing in a checkout line watching her mother count change while the people behind them sighed that she would never be poor again, and that she would measure her distance from that trailer in the only unit that had ever mattered: dollars. And she had done it. God, she had done it. She had clawed her way out scholarships, then jobs, then a company of her own, a consumer finance empire that she had built from a single insight about how ordinary people borrow and spend. And that insight had made her, by 54, one of the wealthiest self-made women in the country. She had a building with her name on it. She had the Rolls. She had put more distance between herself and that trailer than she'd ever dreamed possible, but the unit of measurement had never changed. This was the thing about Patrice Hollis that no one, including Patrice Hollis, fully understood. She still measured everything in money. It was the only yardstick she trusted, because it was the one that had saved her. The value of a thing was its price. The value of a solution was its cost. The value of a person, though she would have been horrified to hear it said out loud, was something she calculated, automatically in the back of her mind, the moment she met them, what they earned, what they could do for her, what they were worth. She had spent 40 years equating price with value so completely that she had lost the ability to tell them apart. To Patrice, the more expensive thing was the better thing. The most expensive thing was the best. It was not arrogance. It was the deepest survival lesson of her life, and it had never once failed her. Until the Rolls. She had bought the Phantom 3 years ago, the most expensive car she could buy, naturally, because in her grammar that meant the best. And 14 months ago it had developed its fault, and Patrice had done the only thing her whole life had taught her to do when faced with a problem. She had spent. She had escalated. She had reached, every single time, for the more expensive option, certain that enough money would solve it. The way enough money had solved everything since she was 10 years old in that checkout line. The dealership, then the pricier specialists, then the elite diagnostics firm. $1 million, climbing, each expensive failure answered with a more expensive attempt, because the idea that the answer might be cheap was not a thought her mind could hold. Cheap, in Patrice's grammar, meant worthless. Cheap was the trailer. Cheap was the thing you escaped, and there was a person this had cost her, though she did not connect it to the car. There was a child, her son, Daniel, 30 now, who had grown up with everything she had never had, and who had looked at all of it, the money, the company waiting for him, the yardstick, and had quietly, without drama, walked away from it. He had become a high school teacher. History, in a district 2 hours away. He drove a used car and rented an apartment and seemed infuriatingly happy, and Patrice had never forgiven him for it, because by the only measure she had, her son had chosen to be worth less. They had not spoken, really spoken, in 4 years. She told people he was finding himself. What she felt was a grief she had no language for, because the language she had would have required her to say that her son had thrown away his value, and some quiet, buried part of her knew that wasn't true, and could not bear to look at why. She did not know, walking into that auto shop, that she was about to be taught the difference between price and value by a man who had made the exact choice her son had made, and that it would finally send her home. Marcus Webb made about $51,000 a year, and he was the richest man most of his students would ever meet. He had been the auto shop teacher at Lincoln Vocational for 19 years, and before that, he had been, for a while, the kind of mechanic that dealerships fight over a diagnostic talent, the rare technician who could find the fault that defeated everyone else, the guy the service manager called when a car had been in the bay for a week and nobody could crack it. He'd had offers, real ones. A flagship dealership had once put a number in front of him: shop foreman. 6 figures. The works that would have changed his life. He'd turned it down to teach. People had thought he was crazy. His own father had thought he was crazy. But Marcus had figured something out early, that most people spend their whole lives not figuring out. That the dealership money would have bought him a bigger house and a nicer truck, and not one single thing he actually wanted. What he wanted was the moment, and he got it 3 or 4 times a year. And it never got old when a 16-year-old who'd been told their whole life that they weren't smart, that they were a hands kid and not a brains kid, as if those were different things, finally got it. Felt the engine catch under work they'd done themselves. Understood that they could take a dead thing and make it live. Marcus had watched that moment crack kids open and remake them. He had watched it pull kids out of trouble, out of nowhere, into trade careers that gave them lives. You could not put a price on it. And Marcus had decided long ago that the things you can't put a price on are the only things worth organizing a life around. He understood cars the way he understood kids, patiently, by listening, by refusing to give up on the ones everyone else had written off. And his real gift, the one the dealerships had wanted, was diagnostic. He could find what was wrong, not by throwing parts at it, not by trusting the scan tool's verdict, but by the old, cheap, nearly lost art of listening to the machine, a length of hose pressed to his ear. A hand laid on a hose to feel for a pulse of leaking air. The senses of a man who'd learned to fix cars back when you couldn't just plug in a computer and read the answer. Back when the answer was hidden and you had to hunt it with nothing but attention. He was a single father, not the way most people meant it. 5 years ago, his younger sister Nicole had died of fast cancer. The kind that doesn't wait, and she'd had a son, Isaiah, who'd been 8, and a father who'd been long gone. And at the funeral, Marcus had looked at that 8-year-old boy and understood that there was not actually a decision to make, because some things aren't decisions, they're just who you are. He had taken Isaiah home that week. He had adopted him within the year. Isaiah called him Dad now, had for years, and Marcus was his father in every way that counted, which was all the ways. It had cost him. Of course it had cost him. A single man in his late 40s on a teacher's salary, suddenly raising a grieving child, it had cost him money and sleep, and the simpler life he might have had. And if you had asked Marcus Webb whether it was worth it, he would have looked at you like you'd asked whether breathing was worth it, because the question itself revealed that you were measuring with the wrong instrument. Isaiah was 13 now, and lately this was the quiet worry at the center of Marcus's life. Isaiah had started to notice what they didn't have. It was the age for it. He'd come home from a friend's bigger house, a little quieter. He'd started caring about brands, about phones, about the stuff that announces a person's worth in the only language a certain kind of world speaks. He'd asked Marcus, not unkindly but with a 13-year-old's brutal honesty, why he'd never taken the good job. Why they had to be careful about money when Marcus was the smartest guy anybody knew. Marcus had answered as best he could, but he could see his son being slowly recruited, the way all kids are, by the idea that value is a number, and he didn't know how to inoculate a boy against a lie that the whole world tells in 1,000 voices. He didn't know that the lesson was about to drive itself into his shop on a flatbed, in the form of a $500,000 car, a $1 million repair bill, and a woman who measured everything exactly the way Marcus was terrified his son would learn to. It had come to him through Eddie, who drove for a regional tow company and had been one of Marcus's students 20 years back. Eddie had picked the Phantom up again. He'd hauled it to 3 different specialists over the year, and somewhere on the drive, the rich woman in the back had said, mostly to herself, that she was going to scrap a $500,000 car because not one person on earth could fix it. And Eddie, who owed his whole career to a man who'd refused to give up on him at 16, had said, carefully, that he knew somebody. A teacher. Best he'd ever seen at finding what nobody else could. Probably the woman wouldn't be interested. It was just a high school. Patrice Hollis had been interested the way drowning people are interested in driftwood without dignity and against her better judgment. So now she was here, and Marcus Webb had the hood up, and her disbelief was a physical thing in the room. "You teach children," she said. It came out sharper than she meant, the exhaustion talking. "I have had Rolls-Royce factory-trained master technicians on this car. I have had a firm that charges $600 an hour. And you're telling me you, in a public school, with," she gestured at the clear plastic hose in his hand, "that are going to find what they couldn't." "I'm telling you I'm going to try," Marcus said, unbothered. "And I'll tell you something else, since you paid for the truth and didn't get it." He looked at her steadily. "Those master techs you hired? They're good. I'm not knocking them. But they were trained to do one thing, which is to follow the diagnostic computer and replace the part it points to. That's the whole modern business. The car tells you what's wrong. You replace what it says. You bill the customer. And it works, 95% of the time." He nodded at the Phantom. "But your car's got the other 5%. The kind where the computer is reading a symptom 3 rooms away from the actual problem and points everybody at the wrong thing, and they replace the wrong thing over and over, more and more expensive, and never get near it. Your $1 million bought you the same wrong guess 14 times. It didn't buy you somebody who'd stop trusting the computer and start listening to the car. And you listen to the car. It's about all I do," Marcus said. "It's about all I teach. These computers are wonderful, but they made everybody forget that a car will tell you what's wrong, if you know how to hear it. That's not a skill you learn on expensive cars. You learn it on cheap ones, on cars where the customer can't afford to just keep replacing parts, where you've got to actually find it or the family doesn't drive. I learned it on the worst, cheapest, most beat-to-death cars in this valley." A small smile. "Turns out a vacuum leak sounds the same on a Rolls-Royce as it does on a 1994 Corolla. The car doesn't know what it cost." Patrice opened her mouth and didn't have anything to put in it. Behind her, the 16-year-olds had drifted closer, drawn the way kids are drawn to a teacher who's about to show them something real. Isaiah was among them. He had 4th period in his dad's shop, a quiet pride he didn't always show, and he was watching the rich woman with the expensive coat and the $500,000 car, with the specific, complicated hunger of a 13-year-old who had recently started to wonder whether his father had bet his life on the wrong things. "Watch," Marcus told them. "All of them. Because what I'm about to show you, they don't teach in the expensive places anymore. And it's worth more than the whole car." He leaned in over the engine of the Rolls-Royce, the clear hose in his hand, and he closed his eyes, and he began to listen. He didn't touch the diagnostic ports. He didn't ask for the foot-thick file of reports the specialists had generated. He asked 3 questions, and then he listened to the car. When it acts up, he said, eyes still closed, one end of the hose at his ear, and the other end moving slowly over the engine like a doctor with a stethoscope. "Is it more when the engine's hot? After it's been running a while?" Patrice thought. "Yes. Usually it's worse on long drives. They could never make it happen in the shop. Because the shop's cold and the test is short," Marcus said. "Rubber's a funny thing. A crack in a rubber part can seal up tight when it's cold and open right up when it's hot and flexing. Cold, the car's perfect. Hot, it falls apart. So you take it in, they run it cold for 20 minutes. Everything checks out. They hand it back, and an hour down the highway, it's the carnival again. That's not a hard problem. That's a hot problem pretending to be a hard one." He moved the hose. "Your brake pedal going hard, that's a vacuum problem. Vacuum runs your brake booster. When you lose vacuum, the pedal goes to stone. And when the engine loses vacuum where it shouldn't, it runs rough. It stalls, and it throws every sensor into a panic. and the computer lights up the whole dash trying to make sense of nonsense. One little leak, a dozen symptoms 3 rooms away. That's why they kept chasing the dash. He moved the hose to a spot low and toward the back of the engine, a place tucked behind other things, hard to see, easy to skip, and he stopped. "There you are," he said quietly. He had them gather closer. He pointed not at a computer, not at a $40,000 module, but at a small plastic component the size of a thumb, set into a vacuum line, a one-way check valve, a humble part that lets air move one direction and not the other, the kind of part that lives in nearly every car ever built. He worked it free with his fingers. He held it up to the fluorescent light, and he flexed it, and there when he flexed it, hot and under stress, exactly as it would be on a long drive, a hairline crack opened along its seam, and you could hear, in the dead silent shop, the faintest whisper of air. "That's it," Marcus said. "That's your 14 months. That's your $1 million. A cracked vacuum check valve. It seals up cold, so it passed every test they ran. It opens up hot, so it ruined every long drive you took. And because the symptoms showed up over in the electronics, a parade of very smart, very expensive people spent a year replacing computers 3 rooms away from a $2 piece of plastic." He turned to his students. "What's the lesson?" A kid in safety glasses said, uncertainly, "Look where it's quiet. Look where nobody else is looking." Marcus said, "The answer's almost never where the noise is. The noise is the symptom. The answer's somewhere quiet, behind something, where it's cheap and boring and nobody important would think to check." He looked, just for a second, at Patrice, especially nobody who's been taught that the answer has to be expensive. He sent Isaiah to the parts cabinet. They kept the common stuff in stock, because common stuff is what breaks. The replacement check valve, a universal part, fits 100 cars, cost the school $12. Marcus installed it in under 2 minutes. Then he had a student start the Phantom, and he ran it, and they let it warm all the way up, hot, the condition that had defeated a year of specialists, and the Rolls-Royce idled, and kept idling, smooth and silent and perfect, the way a Rolls-Royce is supposed to idle, the most refined engine in the world doing exactly what it was built to do, healed by a $12 part, and a man who knew how to listen. No stall, no carnival, no stone-hard pedal, just the quiet. Patrice Hollis stood in a high school auto shop and listened to the silence of a car that $1 million could not fix and $12 had. And something in the foundation of her whole life made a sound like a crack opening along a seam. "What do I owe you?" Patrice said, when she could speak. And Marcus Webb did the thing that finished what the $12 part had started. He wrote it on a shop ticket, in pencil, the same as he'd write it for anyone. "Part's $12, he said. "Call it an hour of labor at the shop's community rate, which is 40. So 52. He tore it off and held it out. "If you want to do something extra, the shop program can always use a donation we run on fumes and the kids need tools. But that's separate. Your bill is $52. Patrice looked at the slip of paper. $52, in pencil, from a man who had just succeeded where $1 million had failed. "You could charge me anything," she said. Her voice was strange. "You understand that. I would have paid you $50,000 right now gratefully and never blinked. You could name a number, any number, and you wrote $52. The job was the job," Marcus said simply. "A part and an hour. Charging you $50,000 because you can pay it, that's not what the work was worth. That's what your panic was worth. Those are different numbers." He set the pencil down. "I think that might be the thing your whole car trouble was really about, if you don't mind me saying. You kept paying more because you thought more money meant closer to the answer. But the price of a thing and the value of a thing aren't the same, ma'am. They've got almost nothing to do with each other. The most valuable part on that whole $500,000 car was a $12 piece of plastic. The most valuable thing in this whole building is a bunch of kids everybody else gave up on. Price and value. He shook his head. The world's got 'em mixed up so bad. Patrice Hollis stood very still. Because he had reached, without any idea he was doing it, all the way down to the trailer, to the checkout line, to the 10-year-old who'd decided that worth was a number, and to the 30-year-old son 2 hours away, who'd looked at all her money and chosen to teach history in a used car, and whom she had quietly, for 4 years, considered a disappointment. Because by the only instrument she owned, her son was worth less. But her son had made the exact choice this man had made, and this man was not worth less. This man had just, with $12 and 30 years of attention and a length of plastic hose, done what her $1 million couldn't, and he was raising someone else's grieving child as his own on $51,000 a year, and he was clearly, obviously, richer than she was, in every way that her yardstick had never once been able to measure. She had spent 40 years certain she'd escaped the trailer. She was realizing, in a high school auto shop, that she'd brought its smallest, poorest idea with her, the whole way the idea that a person's worth is a number, and that she had been measuring her own son with it, and had gotten the most important calculation of her life catastrophically wrong. "Your boy," she said suddenly, looking at Isaiah, who'd come to stand near his father. "He's yours, he's mine. You teach." You make. She stopped herself before the number, hearing for the first time how it sounded. You could have done anything with a gift like that. And you teach kids and raise a boy and charge people $52. "I did do anything," Marcus said. "I did the thing I wanted. That's what the money was for, far as I ever figured. To buy the life you actually want. I just skipped the part where you spend 40 years getting the money first." He put his hand on Isaiah's shoulder. "I've got everything I'd buy if I had it all. Wouldn't change a thing." And Isaiah Webb, 13, who had spent the last year being quietly recruited by the lie that value is a number, watched a billionaire stand in his father's shop and look at his father like he was the rich one, and felt the recruitment, quietly, fail. She paid the $52. She wrote the shop program a check too, a real one, large. And Marcus thanked her for the kids, and meant it, but she understood, now, that the check was not the point. And that understanding was the first genuinely new thing Patrice Hollis had learned in a very long time. The point was sitting 2 hours away in a rented apartment, grading papers, in a used car, in a life she had spent 4 years calling a disappointment. She did not drive the Rolls home. She had it delivered. She drove herself, alone, 2 hours. In a rental car, she asked her assistant to arrange without explanation, because some trips you have to take in something ordinary. Daniel opened the door and could not hide his surprise. His mother. Unannounced, 2 hours from home, in a car he didn't recognize, with a face he hadn't seen on her in years open. Uncertain, almost afraid. "I owe you an apology," Patrice said on the doorstep, before she could lose her nerve. "I've spent 4 years thinking you threw your life away. Because you didn't take the money. Because you do something that doesn't pay." Her voice was not steady. "I met a man today. A teacher. He fixed something for me that I'd spent a fortune failing to fix. And he charged me almost nothing. And he's the richest person I've ever met. And I couldn't see it, Daniel. Because I've been measuring with the wrong. I've been measuring everything with the wrong." She stopped. Started again, simpler. "I've been measuring you with the wrong thing. Your whole life. And I'm so sorry. Can I come in? I'd like to hear about your students. I don't think I've ever once asked you about your students." And her son, who had waited 4 years for his mother to learn the difference between the price of a life and the worth of one, stood back from the door and let her in. Marcus Webb drove home that night in his truck with Isaiah in the passenger seat. "That was kind of awesome," Isaiah admitted, in the careful way 13-year-olds admit their dad was right about something. The whole she spent $1 million. And you $12 part, Marcus said. And you could have charged her anything. She said so. You could have. I know what I could have charged her. Isaiah was quiet for a minute, watching the valley go by. Why didn't you? He asked. But it was a different question than the one he'd been asking all year. Why didn't you take the good job? Why don't we have more? And they both knew it. It was a real question now. He wanted the real answer. Because the day I start charging people what their panic is worth instead of what the work is worth, Marcus said, I turn into somebody who measures everything in money. And I've watched what that does to people. I watched it walk into my shop today in a very nice coat, miserable, with a car $1 million couldn't fix. He glanced at his son. She had everything money buys, and she couldn't see the one rich man in the room. I don't ever want to be that. And I don't want you to be that. There's a yardstick the whole world's gonna try to hand you, your whole life, that measures people in dollars. Don't take it, son. It's broken. It'll tell you the cheap thing is worthless and the expensive thing is precious, and it'll be wrong about almost everything that matters. Isaiah thought about it the rest of the way home. The $12 part, he said finally, fixed the $500,000 car. Now you've got it, Marcus said. Now you've got the whole thing. There is a difference between the price of a thing and the worth of a thing, and almost everyone, almost all the time, gets them confused. We are taught not to. We are taught, in 1,000 quiet ways from the time we're small, that the expensive thing is the good thing, that the cheap thing is the lesser thing, that a price tag is a kind of truth, and so we reach, when something breaks, for the most expensive fix. We look, when something's wrong, in the most expensive place. And we measure people, God help us. We measure people by what they cost and what they earn. And we call the ones who chose less disappointments. And we never notice that we're using a yardstick that can't see the only things that matter. Patrice Hollis spent $1 million looking for an answer in the most expensive place, because her whole life had taught her that's where answers live. And the answer was a $12 part. Behind something, where it was quiet and cheap and boring, found by a man who made $51,000 a year and was richer than she'd ever been. He could have charged her anything. She'd have paid it. He charged her $52 because the work was worth $52, and a man who knows the difference between price and value doesn't sell the difference, even when the buyer's begging. The most valuable part on that whole $500,000 car was a $12 piece of plastic. The most valuable thing in that whole building was a room full of kids the world had written off. And the richest person in the story was the one who made the least, because he'd figured out the thing she'd spent 54 years, not learning that the money was only ever supposed to be for buying the life you actually want, and that if you've got the life, you're already rich. And the number was never the point. She drove 2 hours that night to tell her son she'd had it wrong. That's worth more than the car.